A quick question for you. If the Republican Party wins in November, what is the plan to control inflation and housing costs, which have ramped up incredibly over the next 4 years?
Yeah, so like this is going to be really really tough because now we're in this point where you have to be careful of what's called of deflation because inflation is tough. It's a silent tax, especially on working people, especially on seniors who are on fixed income. But deflation actually becomes more of a problem. So I think where we need to move now is price stability. That's actually done a couple of ways. The first is you have to control federal spending. On Capitol Hill, we've been wanting to actually, I would say we, meaning Republicans, we've been wanting to go back to what we call pre-COVID spending levels, meaning that before COVID-19, the federal government now spends roughly 30% more in the federal agencies. That's before you even get to the entitlement programs, 30% more today than it spent before COVID-19. Some of the fights around government spending during the last debt ceiling deal was about actually bringing the federal agencies back to pre-COVID spending levels. My Democrat colleagues don't want to do that. Right now, we're running a budget deficit of $1.8 trillion, and we're not in a war. Like we're not actively in a war. Now we're supporting two conflicts, but we're not actively at war right now. And so when you massively spend like this, when you're not in a war or you're not in a pandemic, what's going to happen is you're going to keep devaluing the dollar, which also decreases purchasing power, which leads to inflation when people go to stores. So job one is you got to cut spending. It has to be constrained. So you're not inflating. You're basically not devaluing the dollar, which decreases purchasing power for consumers.
Cut Number spending, two, where would you cut spending at? Where would you cut spending?
Oh, this is a great question. A couple of places. Number one, in DOD, there has to be some serious adjustments. And now I'm not speaking for the campaign. This is me talking. I'm talking for myself.
Okay.
DOD, there's got to be some adjustments, no doubt about it.
We have a procurement problem. To cut there?
Is it possible? Yeah, but it takes presidential leadership. And it's not something that the House can do by itself or the Senate can do by itself. You got to have presidential leadership to do it. And speaking specifically about defense, we're in a very precarious position. We have a lot of legacy ships and material that we do have to update at the same time, trying to be prepared for whatever conflicts are going on around the globe. And the third piece of that is that we have a larger workforce at DOD. So we're going to have to figure out very constructively, but can you get some procurement reforms at DOD to be able to cut some spending? Yes, you can. It's also in the agencies themselves. Every agency across the board, like I said, is up 20 to 30%. We also know that most federal employees are not actually in the office. They mostly work remote today. So that's an issue that we got to figure out. We have a lot of unused buildings in the federal government right now, in part because of COVID, but also before COVID, you had the work from home programs that were starting to move through the federal agencies before COVID-19. You have to address what are you going to do about spending in various agencies at the levels. How many departments within the agency are you going to have? What are the missions of the federal agencies? So you can do all that stuff. When my colleagues, when we worked on this on Capitol Hill over the last 2 years, we believe, yes, you could trim about $100 billion out of the agencies. Yes, you can do that. And that's even before you start getting to what are we going to do with Ukraine? What are we going to do about the Green New Deal tax credits, which Wall Street or Goldman, I think, valued at $1.4 trillion over the next decade. Well, let's examine that. You're going to spend $1.4 trillion on Green New Deal technology. However, no matter how you feel about climate change, that's what you're going to spend. You have to acknowledge that most of that money is actually going to go either to companies domestically that source their material from China or overseas, because we don't mine the critical minerals in the United States to build a lot of this tech. So that's where the money is going to flow. So you're sending a $1.4 trillion, maybe more, over to our adversary in China. To what end? Because we know solar panels and wind turbines cannot power the electric grid. We know this. It's not sustainable energy. It's not consistent energy. It's not baseload power that we need in the United States. So yeah, there's plenty of ways to cut.
Let me ask you this: as far as your party has been anti-forgiveness of student loans, right? That's something that the president has tried to push through.
Supreme Court, which leans heavy conservative. They went against that. Local judges that are conservative went against it. Why are you guys so anti forgiving student loans when millions of people are struggling with student loan debt?
So look, I look at this from a personal matter. I had student loan debt. I had a bunch of it actually. And so I went through that process of trying to figure out, how to pay it down, pay it off. I was fortunate enough to pay it off. Me personally, I was able to sell my house at a particular point in time where I had additional funds. And so my wife and I made a decision to pay off our loans. But the reality is 2/3 of the American people actually don't go to college. So we have multiple issues when it comes to student loan debt. Number one, 2/3 of the people don't go to college. So you're asking 2/3 of the nation to pay for 1/3 of the nation. And it's not even a third of the nation. It's more like probably maybe 15 to 20% of the nation.
Well, to push back on that, because this is
Sure.
pushback that we get on social media, right? They're saying, okay, well, we can pay for hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine, Israel, a bunch of foreign entities, right? They don't make up any part of the population. So why are we funding wars overseas when we could help, even if it's 15% of the population? They're still American citizens, right? So our tax dollars are getting spent on things that we're not involved in, right? We're not involved in these things, but so it's like for that, the person that's like, well, why am I paying for somebody else's student loans? Well, why are you paying for somebody else's war?
Well, look, first of all, you get no argument from me on that point. There's a reason why I voted for the first Ukraine supplemental. I haven't voted for any other since then. So I think there's a legitimate point. I understand that angst. We can expand that not just to foreign wars. We can expand that to illegal immigration going on in the country right now. So I do agree with that point. I think when you talk about student loans, though, there is a situation where internally amongst Americans, you're going to have Americans saying, why am I paying off a $50,000 student loan debt from an Ivy League or from a private university? Or if you went to public university like I did, why am I paying off somebody's $22,000, $25,000, $30,000 student loan debt? You're going to have that internal conversation as well with Americans. The other point is that what we've done as a country, we have to get out of this mindset like college education is the only way to be successful. I'm not diminishing college education. I'm college educated, but there are many ways for young people to be successful in the United States. And what you actually find, and the reason why I said really like 15 to 20% is because of the third of the country that went to college, easily half of them can pay their loans, have been paying their loans, or doing that every single day. It's the people who unfortunately went and got a college degree that they cannot monetize in the economy because they were sold the bill of goods about go to college and you'll be a success. Then they got the piece of paper that didn't have economic value, but they have a debt burden associated with it. So I think we have to really look at what are we going to fund in terms of college education? Which degrees have economic value? Which degrees have less economic value? That's really important. The third thing I will say, the Biden administration, they just decided to just do it on their own. But even Nancy Pelosi said they couldn't do it. They didn't bring a bill to Congress because they knew Congress wouldn't approve it. And I would argue it's not just Republicans. You have some Democrats that wouldn't approve it because they are looking at the same issue. If you go through the process of essentially legally forgiving student loan debt, what you're also going to do is supercharge future college tuition into the future, because the colleges are going to say, oh, well, shoot, we can just charge people whatever. It doesn't matter what we produce. And then the government's going to come in the back door and just pay for it anyway. Well, that's the telltale way to increase the cost of college education going forward. I think, obviously, I believe college education has great value. I do. But broad-based student loan forgiveness is not the recipe for success. I think the recipe for success is broad-based economic growth that allows people to use their college skills to earn for themselves and give them the ability to pay those debts down.
That's a quick follow-up.
Well, Ian, I want to stay there because again, we are all college graduates, and I agree with what you said. Everybody is not going to be fit or needs to go to college because there are different careers that can prove to be successful in life. But that leads to people creating more small businesses, having more entrepreneurs. I wonder what the party's plan is to create incentives, create policies, to create legislation to help incentivize entrepreneurs, small businesses, specifically those who are Black and brown as we see the numbers when it comes to lending, when it comes to having scalable businesses, it becomes extremely difficult. So I wonder what the party's idea is around that.
Two major things. One is deregulation. And I know that historically in politics, deregulation gets like a bad connotation because people view it as, oh, you're taking the rules away from the big guys. But I want to just tell everybody, the big guys don't care what rules you create. They have enough money and enough lawyers and enough employees to work their way around the rules. And also, if we're going to really look at how a lot of economic regulation is crafted, the big guys are in the room when it's getting written. So they know where the loopholes and where the traps are. It's your small business owner that's not in the room. They don't really know how the stuff is being crafted or drafted. So part of it is deregulation. I'll give you an example. In the digital asset space. Me personally, as a member of Congress, I sit on financial services. I believe we should have a regulatory sandbox for the digital assets industry. What I mean by that is the industry itself should stand up a regulatory body. That regulatory body creates its own rules and its own frameworks. The federal government can comment on those rules, the various agencies, whether it's FCC, Treasury, CFTC, OCC, they can comment on the rules of the digital assets industry, but the bureaucracy is not the one actually crafting the rules and the regulations. The reason why I believe that's important is because digital assets is a fledgling industry right now. It's in its infancy. We really don't know where it's going to go. It needs to be nimble in terms of how they're going to organize themselves as an industry so that young entrepreneurs can get into that space. I believe right now, not even believe, I know in digital assets, you have a lot of young Black entrepreneurs in digital assets because it's a tech industry. A lot of the overhead to getting involved is actually very, very low. There's an ability to build various tech products, whether they're direct cryptocurrency tech or supportive tech around various coins, currencies, etc. But if you have a top-down authoritative regulatory framework from Washington, it makes it harder for those people, Black people or anybody else, to be able to engage in that industry and be successful. So I think that's part of it. The other part, and that's why I keep going back to energy, because energy is infectious in everything that we do. Energy can raise the cost of production if you want to have a company in the digital space or not. And I think the third piece is, and this is where the campaign's tax policy is really important, because if you have a situation where your small business can make 100% expensing in the current year, that allows you to be able to really let those dollars flow, go directly into the enterprise, and you can recoup those dollars or decrease your tax burden associated with the dollars you expended. Last thing I will say is about capital issues. We have a major issue with access to capital in the United States, and that's because of poor banking regulatory policy. Current banking regulatory policy has made the big banks much bigger than they were at the financial collapse back in 2007, 2008. So your community banks really aren't in circulation of where they were, now 15 years ago, 16 years ago, 17 years ago. That entire framework of community banking is a lot smaller. There were some Black-owned community banks that could not survive because of the new regulatory pressure from Dodd-Frank regulation that was written and passed when Barack Obama was president of the United States. So all these things interlock and go together. That's really the Republicans' view of how you encourage small business formation, give them the legs and the ability to grow and to thrive and then be successful.
Going back to the student loan crisis, I think it's one of the biggest bubbles that we're facing. At some point, shouldn't the colleges and universities be liable for this massive debt trap that they put out on consumers? Because if any other industry had a 50 to 60% defective rate, there would be a lot of regulatory pressure that they would face. At what point do you think the colleges and universities will have to be liable?
I think it's coming, to be honest with you. I know we have members on the Hill who want to look at college endowments and say, look, these colleges have massive endowments, but they're still charging out the wazoo for kids to go. I think in terms of how you hold them accountable is tough, because when I was 17, before I went to college, when I was 17, I signed up. I signed the FAFSA forms. I did all that stuff. My mom took out a loan my first year in college because I was out of state tuition going into Florida. So we signed up. And so now contractually, if you go back and say, well, no, colleges, it's your fault, the college is going to do what anybody else would do. They're going to hold their contracts up and be like, we didn't force anybody to sign up. We told you we were going to charge you. And that's going to be an entire mess of a situation. Me personally, I feel really awful for what's happened because, you know, I think a lot of kids just didn't know. I know I didn't know when I went to college. I just went and I majored in a degree that I knew I would be able to make money with. But a lot of people didn't know that. They were just told, do this and it's going to work out. And it hasn't worked out. So that's why I believe the way you deal with this going forward is, first is we have to be very careful about how we subsidize student loans going forward. And that doesn't mean you get away from student loans. It's important for a lot of kids from poor backgrounds to be able to go and excel in college. But we got to be very careful about how we do that. We have to make sure kids are focused into degrees that have economic value, like I said earlier. And then the third piece really starts in high school. Are our high schools now geared to be factories towards economic success, whether that's career and college or college, or are they going to continue just to be factories for higher education? Because if high schools are going to continue to be factories for higher education, there's still going to be young kids who are going to turn into 30-year-olds who are going to feel left behind and in a lurch because the system of education is not propelling them to be successful in life.